I still don't know how to say this part correctly. Every time I try, it feels like the memory changes, like it doesn't want to stay in order. All I know is this. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer, and ended with a silence I still can't get used to. Emily didn't just disappear. Something about the way it happened doesn't sit right inside my mind, even now, even after everything we learned. There are moments I still stop and ask myself, did that really happen the way I remember it? Emily always visited on Sundays, always, but one Sunday she didn't come. No message, no explanation, just silence. At first I thought nothing of it, but then my daughter called me. Her voice was strange, not panicked, just confused. She said she was active last night. I remember laughing slightly. Active at what time? Then she said something that didn't make sense. After 3 a.m. I paused because that wasn't Emily. That wasn't her life. At least, that's what we believed. But even as I said that to myself, I felt something shift inside me, just slightly, like a door not fully closed. A few days before everything happened, Emily came to my house. I remember it clearly, but also not clearly. That's the strange part. Some details are sharp, others feel missing. She stood near the window for too long, not sitting like she usually does, just watching outside. And then she said something I still don't fully understand, not because the words were strange, but because of the way she said them. Grandma, do you ever feel like something is already happening before it happens? I remember smiling, trying to make it light, but she didn't smile back. She just stayed quiet, too quiet. And then her phone rang. She looked at it, didn't answer. But something in her face changed, not fear exactly, more like recognition, like she already knew who it was. And then she said, I should go soon. But she didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. I wish I had. This is the part I still hesitate to talk about, because it doesn't fit properly anywhere. A photo appeared in the family chat from Emily. It showed a street. Nothing unusual, but the timestamp was 2:41 a.m. I remember my daughter calling her immediately. There was a pause, a long one. Then Emily said something I didn't expect. I didn't send that. Not confused, not joking, just flat, like she was certain. Then she said something else, something even stranger. Delete it? And she did, while still on the call. And I remember thinking, why would someone delete something they say they never sent? But even that thought felt too simple, like I was missing something bigger. 3 nights later, 10:47 p.m., the message came. I'm fine, going away for a few days. At first, nobody reacted strongly, and I hate admitting that. But it's true, because families don't immediately believe something is wrong. They negotiate with reality first. My daughter said, maybe she just needs space, and I nodded, even though I didn't feel convinced, because the message didn't feel like Emily. It didn't sound like her voice. It sounded emptied, like someone had removed everything unnecessary, too clean, too simple, too controlled. And that's what scared me later. Not what it said, but what it didn't. When we arrived at her apartment, everything looked normal, too normal. That's what I remember most. Normal is supposed to feel safe, but this didn't. Her camera was still on the desk. That alone made my chest tighten, because Emily never left it behind, ever. One officer asked quietly, Did she ever go anywhere without it? And I said no, too quickly, because the moment I said it, I realized I was already afraid of the answer. But then something happened that I still can't fully explain. Her phone, still in evidence, pinged. Once. Just a single notification sound. Everyone froze. I remember my own voice sounding far away. Did that just come from her phone? No one answered me, not immediately. And in that silence, I felt something I can't describe properly. Not fear, not confusion. Something closer to realization that something in this situation was not behaving correctly. Later that night, I couldn't stay calm anymore. I started checking locks twice. Then 3 times, I turned on lights I normally never use, because for the first time in my life, I didn't trust quiet. Then my daughter called again. Her voice was shaking now. There's something else. I asked her what. She hesitated, long enough that I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Then she said, there's a vehicle. A pause. Near her apartment, multiple nights. I asked, what kind of vehicle? And she said, dark SUV. But what I remember most is not the words, it's the feeling after them. Because suddenly, it wasn't just that Emily was missing. It was that something had been there before she disappeared and might still be there now, somewhere, watching, waiting. And this is where I lose clarity, because after that, things don't line up in my memory the way they should. There was a neighbor's statement, a sighting, a detail that didn't match the timeline, but every time I try to place it properly, it shifts, moves slightly, like it refuses to stay in one place. All I know is this. At some point, there was a moment where Emily was seen, when she was not supposed to be there. And when I asked police about it later, they didn't answer immediately. That pause is something I still remember more than the answer, because that's when I realized something terrifying. Even the people investigating this didn't fully understand what they were looking at yet, and neither did we, not even close. The first week after Emily disappeared felt like standing in the middle of a storm. Every day brought information, and almost none of it helped. People called constantly. A waitress thought she had seen Emily at a diner nearly 50 miles away. A truck driver was absolutely certain he had spoken to her at a gas station. One woman called police 3 times in 2 days, insisting Emily had been sitting alone in a nearby park. Each tip brought the same feeling: hope, then waiting, then disappointment. I remember my daughter keeping a notebook beside the phone. Every time a new lead arrived, she wrote it down. By the end of the week, the pages were full, but Emily was still gone. One lead seemed especially promising. Security footage from a gas station appeared to show someone who looked remarkably like her. Police spent days following it. For a little while, we truly believed we were getting somewhere. Then the footage was enhanced. Wrong person, wrong lead, nothing. My daughter cried that night, not because the lead failed, because she had allowed herself to believe it was real. And every false lead seemed to take a piece of her with it. Eventually, attention shifted toward Emily's boyfriend, not because police had strong evidence, because they had almost nothing else. The moment his name entered the investigation, our family stopped agreeing with each other. My son became convinced the police were wasting time. My daughter believed they had no choice but to investigate him. Arguments started appearing at family dinners. Then family dinners stopped happening altogether. everyone was grieving differently. Everyone was afraid differently, and everyone wanted a different answer. Police reviewed messages, location records, statements. The process took longer than people expected. Requests had to be approved. Records had to be obtained. Days became weeks. Rumors moved faster than facts. By the time investigators completed most of their review, half the town had already decided he was guilty. Then the theory collapsed, not dramatically, quietly. His timeline largely held together. The evidence didn't support what people wanted to believe. And suddenly, we were back where we started. Except now, we had lost time and hope. A few days later, one detective asked a question that almost sounded insignificant. What about her laptop? The strange thing is, the laptop had already been checked, or at least everyone thought it had. What happened next wasn't a breakthrough. It was something much more uncomfortable. The possibility that investigators had overlooked something sitting in front of them the entire time. The folder wasn't hidden. That detail always stuck with me. People later described it like some secret discovery. It wasn't. It had simply received very little attention. Inside were photographs, mostly abandoned buildings, empty streets, places Emily liked to photograph. At first, nobody thought much of them. Then someone noticed a figure in the background of one image, a blurry shape, far away, difficult to identify, and immediately opinions split. One investigator thought it might be important. Another thought people were seeing patterns that weren't really there. The debate lasted days, not hours, days. What made it harder was that similar shapes appeared in a few other photos, not clearly, not definitively, just enough to create doubt. And doubt became the problem, because once people start looking for something, they begin finding it everywhere. The notebook created another divide. Most of it was ordinary, shopping reminders, photography ideas, random observations, nothing dramatic. Then investigators found a few entries that felt different, not alarming, just uneasy. One line read, "This sounds stupid, but I keep noticing the same guy." A few pages later, "Maybe I'm imagining it." Then later, "Actually, maybe I'm not." That was it. No names, no accusations, no certainty, just uncertainty. My daughter became convinced the notebook was important. My son thought people were reading too much into it. For weeks they argued. Neither could prove they were right. And the truth was, the investigators weren't sure either. The SUV wasn't the strongest piece of evidence. It was the most persistent. That was different. Investigators found it in footage from multiple locations. Not enough to prove involvement. Not enough to dismiss either. Some officers believed it was unrelated. Others weren't comfortable ignoring it. The disagreement became intense enough that resources were shifted back and forth more than once. One investigator reportedly said, "We're chasing a ghost." Another disagreed. "If it's nothing, explain why it keeps showing up." Nobody could. That was the problem. The SUV never became important because investigators proved it mattered. It became important because nobody could explain it away. And eventually, after weeks of elimination, paperwork, and review, one registered owner remained difficult to dismiss, not because the evidence pointed directly at them, because every attempt to rule them out failed, and sometimes in an investigation, That is the closest thing you get to progress. By that point, the case felt different. Not clearer, just heavier. The boyfriend theory was gone. Most witness reports had fallen apart. The notebook raised more questions than answers. The photographs divided investigators. And the SUV refused to disappear. For the first time, it felt like we weren't chasing dozens of possibilities anymore. We were slowly circling something. We just didn't know what it was yet. And that uncertainty was becoming harder to live with than the silence. It didn't collapse suddenly. It started to wobble. Small disagreements at first, then louder ones, then silence in between conversations where there used to be certainty. I remember one meeting where two investigators were looking at the same set of report, but describing completely different conclusions. One said the pattern was becoming clear. The other said they were forcing meaning into coincidence, and neither of them sounded wrong. That was the unsettling part. Not disagreement, but how reasonable both sides sounded. The name returned again, not as a conclusion, as pressure, something that refused to leave the investigation room. But this time, the reaction wasn't calm. It was fractured. One investigator immediately pushed the idea forward. Another shook his head before the sentence even finished. And for the first time, the disagreement wasn't quiet. It became sharp. This is not strong enough. We are running out of alternatives. We are not building a case on absence of options. I remember noticing something strange in that moment. No one looked confident. Even the people speaking strongest sounded like they were holding something unstable. At home, that instability spread. My daughter stopped arguing in full sentences. My son stopped responding completely. And I remember one night she said quietly, "If they are wrong about this, then what are we even looking at?" No one answered her, because nobody had one answer anymore. It didn't happen cleanly. Nothing about it did. When the arrest was discussed internally, it wasn't unanimous. Some investigators believed the threshold had been reached. Others believed it was still too fragile. I remember hearing one of them say, "This will not feel justified to everyone." And they were right. Even inside the investigation team, there was hesitation. Not doubt about action, but doubt about completeness. At home, when we heard about it, there was no reaction like in movies. No relief, no shock, just stillness. My daughter sat down slowly, like her body had already accepted something her mind hadn't. My son said, "So that's it?" But he didn't sound like he believed it. And I remember realizing something uncomfortable in that moment. Even the decision didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a step taken because standing still was no longer possible. The breaking point didn't come during the investigation. It came after. Later that night, when the house was too quiet, my daughter suddenly stood up and said, "No, this doesn't feel right." It wasn't loud, but it wasn't controlled either. For the first time, she wasn't analyzing anything. She was reacting, raw, unfiltered. "I keep thinking about that SUV," she said, "and I don't understand why it still doesn't fully explain everything." Then she stopped, like she had said too much or not enough. And I remember that moment clearly because it wasn't about facts anymore. It was about refusal to emotionally accept closure. And my son, who had stayed quiet for most of the case, finally said something unexpected. Maybe we're not supposed to feel like it's finished. And nobody responded, because that thought felt too close to the truth. People think endings feel like arrival, but this one didn't. It felt like something paused halfway through motion. There was an official conclusion, a direction the case settled into, but it didn't resolve the smaller fractures underneath it. One detail still never fully sits right. The SUV pattern was never explained in a way that removed all doubt. It was interpreted, not resolved. And that difference matters more than people realize, because interpretation ends conversation, but resolution ends questions. And this case didn't end the questions, it just reduced the number of people asking them. At home, nothing returned to normal, not really. My daughter still leaves her chair slightly pulled out at the table, not because she expects anything, but because nothing in the house ever fully reset after that time. And sometimes I sit there thinking about one thing only, not what they concluded, but what never fully aligned inside that conclusion. And I don't say it out loud anymore, because some questions don't stay active. They just stay present. And the last thing I remember clearly is this. Even now, there is still one detail that doesn't fully resolve. Not enough to reopen the case, but enough to keep it from ever feeling complete. And that is the part no one prepares you for. The ending is real, but the resolution isn't.